Shalom. 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 You are welcome to another series titled Killings, Crimes and Revolts Birthing the King James Version. Right from time immemorial, the Roman Catholic Church has enforced the notion of a Latin-only Bible from the onset of Jerome's Latin Vulgate, 382 AD, to the dawn of 1580s. Even though this was reinforced over the course of time, it was during the reign of King Henry IV that a statute was enacted called the De Heretic Comprehend, ca. 1401 AD, which officially forbid English scriptures and made it a heresy. A secular crime, punishable by burning at the stake. In the latter part of the 14th century, revolutionary ideas against the reading of the Latin-only Bible began to come to fruition. The Catholic Church was concerned with the idea of the availability of God's Word in public forums, in the language of the common man, English. Knowing that this would have meant disaster for the Church, the Catholic Church with the help of various kings decided to kill those who disobeyed. In the face of death, the early contributors to the development of the English Bible did not give up. They revolted. They left their legacy to have the Holy Bibles distributed in the language of the common man. In 1580, the Catholic Church gave up the notion of the Latin-only Bible. Most of those that tried to translate the Latin Bible into English were burned at the stake, but their resolve will leave a lasting impact on the formation of the King James Bible. These are a jest of those early contributors that revolted against the English kings and queens. Their struggles and sacrifices lead to the development of the English King James Bible. The first of the revolvers is John Wycliffe, who lived between 1320 to 1380, written English-language Bible manuscripts in the 1380s AD. He was educated at Oxford. He became a professor, scholar, and theologian. Wycliffe was in opposition to the teachings of the organized church in various parts of Europe. He believed that the teachings of the Catholic Church were contradictory to the Bible. With the help of his close assistants, Wycliffe produced a translation of the Holy Scriptures into the English language. His translation came out of the Latin Vulgate, which was the only source text available to Wycliffe. 44 years after his death, the Pope was still annoyed by his translation of the Bible into English, for he ordered his remains to be dug up, crushed, and scattered into the river. John Huss lived between 1372 to 1415. A close follower of Wycliffe, John Huss lived between 1372 to 1415, who continued the propagation of their ideals, that the Bible should be made available to the common man in their vernacular language, English. And more importantly, they should oppose the theological oppression of the Roman Catholic Church regarding the possession of a non-Latin Bible with the risk of death at the stake. Huss was eventually arrested, imprisoned and finally burned at the stake in 1415. Huss was a key contributor to the rise of movements against the Roman Catholic Church. 100 years after his death, his theological teachings had a strong influence in Prague and other parts of Europe, birthing the impetus that will bring forth the Protestant uprisings against the Catholic Church. Johann Gutenberg lived between 1400 to 1468. Johann Gutenberg invented the printing press in the 1450s. Prior to his invention, everything had to be handwritten, which made mass distribution of publications a huge task to bear. His invention speeded the printing of the Latin language. Holy printing press meant that Bibles and books could finally be effectively produced in large quantities in a short period of time. The Gutenberg press contributed to the lowering of the cost of the Bible, thus making it available to the common man. Martin Luther lived between 1486 to 1546. Martin Luther declared his intolerance for the Roman Catholic Church's corruption in 1517. By nailing his 95 Theses of Contention to the Wittenberg church door. Luther, who would be exiled in the months following the Diet of Worms Council in 1521 that was designed to martyr him, would translate the New Testament into German from the 1516 Greek-Latin New Testament of Erasmus, and publish it in September of 1522. Luther also published a German Pentateuch in 1523, and another edition of the German New Testament in 1529. In the 1530s he would go on to publish the entire Bible in German. He was very influential in the assembling of prominent English theologians in his quest to translate the Holy Bible into other native languages. William Tyndale lived between 1494 to 1536. William Tyndale wanted to use the same 1516 Erasmus text as a source to translate and print the New Testament in English for the first time in history. Tyndale showed up on Luther's doorstep in Germany in 1525, and by year's end had translated the New Testament into English. Tyndale had been forced into exile because word of his English New Testament translation had spread abroad. Upon the completion of the translation in 1526, copies were smuggled into England, but were burned as soon as the clergy of King Henry VIII could confiscate them. Anyone found with a Tyndale Bible was burned at the stake, but this did not stop the flow of the Tyndale translation. Eventually, Tyndale was betrayed and arrested and subsequently burned at the stake in 1539. King Henry VIII temporarily lifted and funded the printing of an English Bible known as the Great Bible. Miles Coverdale lived between 1488 to 1568. Miles Coverdale, John Thomas and Matthew Rogers had been vastly impacted by the work of William Tyndale. So upon his untimely death, Miles Coverdale carried on the ideals of Tyndale, finishing the translation of the Old Testament. He printed the first complete Bible in the English language, referring to the German translation of Martin Luther and the Vulgate Latin Bible. Thus, the English Coverdale Bible was completed and printed in 1535. Thomas Cramer lived between 1489 to 1556. He was the Archbishop of Canterbury during the reign of King Henry VIII. In 1539, the king lifted the ban on the availability of English translated Bibles, and the Archbishop employed Miles Coverdale to officially translate the Latin Vulgate Bible into English. This translation became known as the Great Bible. It became the first official English Bible authorized for church usage. It was distributed to every church and read to all that could hear the Word of God in plain English. Unfortunately, after the death of King Henry VIII, the religious gains that were realized became moot. During the reign of Queen Mary I, Thomas Cranmer was arrested, tried for treason and heresy. After 2 years of imprisonment, he was finally executed. His legacy lives on within the Church of England through the publication of the Book of Common Prayer and the translation of the Great Bible. John Calvin lived between 1509 to 1564. The reign of bloody Queen Mary I brought the outset of the Marian exile. Most of the prominent theologians fled to Geneva, where they were highly influenced by the teachings of John Calvin. With assistance from Beza and possibly Calvin himself, several English theologians were involved in a new translation. The work took over 2 years. In 1557, and the complete Bible was first published in 1560. It became known as the Geneva Bible. The Geneva Bible was dedicated to Bloody Mary's successor, Queen Elizabeth I, the daughter of Henry VIII, and in Boleyn. The Geneva Bible was the first Bible to subdivide books into numbered verses and chapters, so that referencing could be implemented. Every chapter was also accompanied by extensive Calvinistic and Puritan marginal notes with complete references, thus making the Geneva Bible the first English study Bible, and of Latin-only Bible. Finally, in 1582, the Church of Rome lifted their hold on the Latin-only Bible and made the Bible available in English. They had an official Roman Catholic English translation, using the Latin Vulgate as their principal text. The kings and queens of the English monarchy that imposed sanctions on the translators of the English Bible, thereby shaping the publication of the King James Bible version, are King Henry VIII of England, Queen Mary I and King James I. King Henry VIII of England reigned between 1509 to 1547, the Pope being the head of Roman Catholicism, and Rome controlled most parts of Western Europe before Henry VIII became king in England. Eventually, his disputes with Popes Julius II and Clement VII led to the establishment of the Church of England, the Anglican Church, and the English translation of the Latin Vulgate Bible. King Henry VIII had 6 marriages, whether legal or illegal depends on whom you ask. His divorcement of Catherine of Aragon led to problems with the Pope. King Henry VIII asked the Pope for permission to divorce his so-called wife, who had been his brother's widow, for he had forcefully married Catherine without the Pope's permission. After the Pope refused this request, the king went ahead and divorced Catherine and married his mistress anyway. Of the Pope, and the Roman Catholic Church led him to take England out of Rome's religious control. With the passing of the Act of Supremacy 1534, he declared himself as the king and head of the newly established Church of England. In his quest to defy the Pope, he funded the printing of an English Bible named the Great Bible. This was the translation of the Latin Vulgate Bible into English. The printing of the English Great Bible made the readership of the Bible available to vast number of his English subjects. Thus the first legal English Bible came to existence. Henry VIII's other major contribution was the Act of Union of 1536, which added Wales to the English government. This territorial expansion led up to the First Welsh Parliament of 1542, thus increasing the population of his subjects. Queen Mary of England reigned between 1553 to 1558. Queen Mary I of England was born to King Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. Mary was the only surviving child. Her reign was known as the Marian Exile, because people fled from England away from her religious persecutions. Queen Mary I was highly influenced by the annulment of her parents. Mary felt deemed illegitimate due to the eventual dissolution of her parents' marriage, and thus her status as an heir to the throne was in jeopardy. She sided with the Roman Catholic Church, which had refused to accept her parents' annulment. Upon the death of her half-brother Edward and her father King Henry VIII, she became the Queen of England. By 1553, when she began to reign, the population of Protestants had increased drastically. Her initial duties were catered on reversing the spread of Protestantism back to Catholicism. She executed many Protestant leaders and returned her subjects to Catholicism. Her restoration of Catholicism was carried out by absolute force. Most Protestants went on exile and never returned until her death in 1558 by her half-sister Queen Elizabeth I, who quickly made changes that brought England back to where it was under King Henry VIII. Those who exiled were influenced by religious uprisings against the Pope and the Catholic Church in other parts of Europe. So upon their return back to England brought with them English translations that led to the printing of the Geneva Bible, 1560, and subsequently the Bishop Bible, 1568. King James I of England reigned between 1603 to 1625. With the death of Queen Elizabeth I, Prince James VI of Scotland became King James I of England. It was under his reign that the English version, King James Bible, was translated. James VI of Scotland reigned between 1567 to 1625. He became James I of England, and Ireland reigned between 1603 to 1625, and was the first king of both England and Scotland with great influence in France. King James I was Prince of Scotland at the tender age of 13 months. His mother Mary, Queen of Scotland, was forced to abdicate. And his father, Lord Darnley, had died mysterious shortly after James was born. He was raised as a Protestant under the regency of the Earl of Moray. He was taught the theology of Calvin. He studied linguistics and was very fluent in Greek, Latin and Hebrew. James inherited the throne of England at the age of 36 years, after the death of his mother's cousin, Queen Elizabeth I, married Anne of Denmark by proxy on August 20, 1589, and in person on November 23, 1589, and again in person in January 21, 1590. They had 8 children together. In 1603, more than 1,000 Puritans petitioned King James I in Parliament for a revision of the order of service, the removal of church symbolism, and requested changes in the church-instituted prayer book. This millenary petition led to the Hampton Court Conference of 1603, which the Puritan, John Reynolds, requested of the king for a better translation of the Bishop's Bible, which was first printed in 1568. After long deliberation, the king agreed with John Reynolds, adding that he had never yet seen a Bible well translated into English. To this end the king handpicked the translators himself. In the summer of 1604, the king appointed 54 men to complete the new translation. Most of these translators were linguistic scholars, half Hebrew and half Greek experts. They included translators from the Church of England and Puritans, believers and unbelievers. 7 of those translators died before the work of translating began, and they were not replaced, including John Reynolds, who had petitioned the king. The translators were divided into 6 teams before the 80 books were translated. 2 were stationed in Cambridge, 2 in Westminster, and the last 2 in Oxford. They were further divided into 2 groups, the Old and the New Testament. The translators referenced previously printed English Bibles. In 1610 the work went to press, and in 1611 it was all done. Because of numerous typographical errors, the original King James Bible was highly denounced by all, but the king intervened by accepting it with his famous addendum, "This is it, whether you like it or not." Thus the printing of the personal and the church pulpit size of the 1611 King James Bibles were printed and distributed to every corner in England. The King James Version of the Holy Bible did not come to us cheaply. Translators paid huge prices. Some paid with their lives. Crimes were committed against innocent translators. Protestants revolted against the Catholic Church, and God shaped the courses which led to the eventual publication of the King James Version of 1611.